Okay, if you've decided to sit P6 Advanced Taxation, then I think the first thing that you're going to come into contact with is really the size of the syllabus. If you use the Kaplan text, for example, you're going to see that it's 1100 pages. So the first time that you see that text, you walk into the lecture hall, and if you couple that with the exam kit, it's a little bit of a shock to the system. It can be quite daunting. I've seen that quite a few times, obviously, having lectured in P6 for several years, and can be off-putting, but it doesn't need to be. So I think you just need to prepare yourself for the volume of the syllabus, and also the fact that you've got 1100 pages or thereabouts of sort of fairly complex rules in certain areas. So it certainly is quite a challenge to pass, but it is doable. Many people have gone before you and passed this paper. I'd say broadly speaking, the average pass rate is around about 50% or thereabouts. So people have done it before you. Some people have done really well. In fact, some people get up in the 80s and even the 90s on occasion. So it's very doable, but you just have to get yourself set, I think, at the outset, and sort of be ready for, I guess, a little bit of a sort of a shock to the system. Probably the biggest syllabus, the biggest textbook that you may have ever seen, and certainly the biggest one across the ACCA papers. I think the other area of concern for a lot of students is whether or not they've sat F6. And maybe their time since F6. So it may be that that was several sittings ago, or maybe even several years ago. So I've seen students get slightly concerned about whether or not they have any tax knowledge left. But I don't think that's something that you should worry overly about. The general time to sit for P6 is, sort of 2.5 to 3 months. I think that's ample time to get through this text and to, become knowledgeable enough to be able to get that magical 50%. I think linked into this area is the idea of tax experience. I've seen students talk about the fact that they don't work in tax, and therefore perhaps to pass a tax exam is going to be much more difficult than, say, passing an exam in an area, I don't know, auditing, for example, that they work in. I don't think that's necessarily the case at all. Again, I'd go back to the point that I made about F6. I think very much if you are set right, you're prepared to do the work, you knuckle down for that sort of 2.5 to 3 month period. I think passing this paper, regardless of whether or not you come at it from no knowledge of tax at all, isn't relevant at all. I think that some people will be exempted from from F6, for example, won't work in tax, and will do very well. I've seen a student, in fact, win a prize who didn't sit F6 and doesn't work in tax, or didn't work in tax. I think the other area for you to think about is coupling P6, given the size of the syllabus and obviously the difficulty level. We can't avoid talk about that, with other subjects. In other words, how many should you do? What combinations should you do? Now, I've seen students sit 4 papers and pass P6. In fact, the girl in particular that I remember actually got a prize in P6. I think that was in June 2011. So I think it's certainly doable to combine it with several other papers, but I think you'll know yourself what you're capable of, I guess, based on your past experience of exams, and how many is good for you. It may well be that this is an area that you need to consider carefully. P6 is a difficult paper, it's a big paper. I would say in my experience, perhaps 1 or 2 more papers maximum, although some people may come at it just on its own. It's really up to you. All I'm asking you to do is just consider this area, and don't bite off more than you can chew. It may well be that you've only got sort of 3 papers left to do, and you feel as if you want to do them in one foul swoop. That'll be down to your estimation of the time that you can commit and your abilities. But don't take on too much. This is a big challenge. Okay. Now, in terms of these complex areas that I was talking about within the P6 syllabus, well, what's tax all about? What is P6 all about? Well, for me, we only have limited time within this webcast, but essentially it's about tricks. It's about knowing the tricks within the P6 text and being able to deal with them under pressure. So perhaps a simple example, a very, very simple example at P6 level would be that you may see an income tax computation or an income tax question where the examiner is including a series of items, and some of them for income tax purposes will not be taxable. In other words, they will be exempt from income tax. So the examiner will scatter these items around the question and see whether or not you know that trick. In other words, whether or not you know to include the narrative of the item and then just write beside it exempt, rather than including the figure and taxing it. So there's a very, very simple example, but I can tell you within the P6 syllabus there are a multitude of other tricks, and indeed across tax, there are exemptions to the exemptions, there are exemptions to the exemptions to the exemptions. So there's lots of sort of ins and outs, and I call them tricks. And the more times that you see questions, the more times that you put yourself under pressure, like you would on the day of the exam, and see these tricks, the better you get at dealing with them. There are a lot of them, but do bear in mind the pass mark for this paper is only 50%. It's not 100%. So you don't need to be a tax expert to pass P6. You don't need to know every single trick. You just need to know enough of them to get through on the day. Okay. Now, in terms of question practice, which was really the core of learning all these complex rules and learning all these tricks, question practice for me is the core area for passing P6, and unfortunately it's an area that students avoid. In other words, they spend a lot of their time on other areas that are not going to help them to pass P6. For example, reading the text and perhaps making notes. We've really got to be honest with ourselves here in relation to this paper. Massive syllabus, yeah, big test on the day. You've got to put yourself in that position. You've got to make question practice the cornerstone of your preparation. In your study sessions, you have to build in as much question practice as you can, and preferably under exam conditions. So it's very much test all the way throughout the 2.5 to 3 months. That's what you've got to do, and it's what students, unfortunately, certainly before they come into my classes, they don't want to do, or they don't know that they should do it. Question practice is key. It's a test after all on the day, and you've got to repeat that process. The other thing linked into this is, again, something that's at P6 level students fall down on. It's that review of your answer against the model answer once you've done your question within your study session. It's absolutely crucial that you learn from your mistakes. I mean, we know that we learn best by making mistakes. Now, if you combine this issue of students, not doing enough question practice with perhaps doing lots and lots of reading, then what you get is a situation where students aren't completing enough of the right type of activities, and also comparing the results against the 100% answer or the model answer. So that review of your model answer or your answer versus the model answer at P6 is really key. That's when you'll learn, you'll learn what you've done wrong, whether or not you've included something that's taxable, that isn't, etc. So avoid activities that are not going to help you, okay? And that's generally reading and making notes. Okay. The other area here is just, given the size of the P6 syllabus, it's really, as you flow through the 3-month period, let's say, if you've got 3 months to sit this exam, what you need to do is you need to develop a way to be going back to earlier areas. You may well start with income tax, at the start of your studies, 3 or 4 weeks later you'll be on to perhaps inheritance tax. You've got to revisit the income tax areas as often as possible and just do some questions on it. In other words, you're basically needing to revise as you go because of the size of the syllabus. It's very, very important that you keep your knowledge up to date on everything that you've covered. Now, I'm not talking about 6 or 7 hours on a weekend going back over stuff that you've covered 4 or 5 weeks ago. All I'm saying is just keep up the testing of earlier areas. Otherwise, what you're going to find is that you're going to get 2 weeks out to the exam or 3 weeks or thereabouts, and you'll be getting into a revision phase. And what you'll find is that there will be some areas that you haven't covered for 2 months, and your knowledge of them may have gone down. So it's important that you keep up the question practice in the areas that you covered 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. Okay. Now, in this area of question practice, one important thing, this is perhaps one of the most important thing within this webcast, is just this idea that students approaching P6 questions, whether or not it's full exam kit questions, so at the exam standard, or indeed questions within the text, is that they are inclined to think that they need to get everything right. Yeah, in other words, that they need 100% in every question to pass this exam. And that is, again, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, mistake that I see with students at the P6 level. I've been lecturing in this subject for several years. It's a big, big mistake. Now, let me explain exactly what I mean. What I mean is that your mindset, your sort of outlook when you sit down, let's say on the exam day, is that you're doing as much as you can in the time allowed and no more. In other words, you're not trying to get everything right. You're just trying to make a good attempt within the time. So, for example, if you're reading down the question and you see parts that you don't really understand, then you just make a stab at them and move on. What you're not going to do at P6 level, and nobody does this, me included, is try to get everything right. Yeah, you don't need to. You only need 50% in each of the questions to pass this exam. So you may well think, well, that's pretty simple, that's a very simple thing to say. Well, it may be simple to say, it's more difficult to do, because I think we're inclined to approach subjects at this level on the basis that that we need to get the question 100% right. We don't. So let's just develop an attitude of, well, sort of gung-ho really, that you're going in, you're doing what you can in the time allowed, you're ignoring things that you can't do, and when the time is up within your given question, then you move on to the next question, and being comfortable with the fact that there are several areas within the question that perhaps you just made a stab at, and maybe one or two that you didn't even make a stab at because you weren't sure or you didn't have the time. So it's very much an attitude of mind as much as anything else. That's a key point for you. Please don't ignore that one. Okay. So in terms of summary points, key summary points for you for P6. The first one is sign up with us. That's the most important point. But listen, wherever you study and wherever you study P6, do be realistic. Realistic about the size of the syllabus. Realistic in your planning. If you're coming at P6, if you're coupling it with another paper, and you're not planned out well, in other words, you haven't cleared the decks for the 2.5 to 3 months or whatever it is, and you think that you can sort of scrape a pass, you're going to have a big problem. You've got to be realistic here about the size of the challenge. I'm not trying to scaremonger here because I don't believe in that, but you've got to be realistic to say this is a big paper. Yeah, I'm going to combine it with, say, one other, and I've really got to get myself set and clear the decks. Do think about other subjects, perhaps one or two, maybe as much as you need, or perhaps you might think of doing it on its own. It's very much up to you. Think about your past history of exams. Think about what has happened. You know, have you had a couple of resits? Have you struggled a bit with computational papers? Have a think about those areas. Study technique, again, question practice. You may well be sick of hearing that phrase, particularly if you sat in one of my classes before. So, you know, question practice is key. Avoid the trap of doing activities within P6 that are not going to get you anywhere. In other words, doing a lot of reading. That's not going to help on the day, because as we know, it's not a reading competition, it's a question competition. And Rory Fish, the P6 examiner, who's actually a very, very reasonable examiner, you know, he is going to come at you and he is going to test you in a big, big way. So, you know, study activities are key. The other point, I guess it sort of links into this issue of the size of the text, and you know, perhaps your day one in your lecture theatre, wherever you're studying, hopefully with us, you know, day one, you look at the size of the text, and it can be very, very daunting. You've got to stay positive throughout all the 3 months or the 2.5 months that you're studying for this paper. You know, you've got to have some confidence in yourself and in your abilities, and you've got to appreciate that it's going to be a little bit up and down. You know, there'll be some areas that you really struggle with, others that you won't, but at all times stay positive. As I said at the outset of this webcast, you know, a lot of people have gone before you and passed this paper. A lot of them have done really, really well. So, you know, how have they done it? It's not magic. They've just planned well, they've executed well, and they've done a lot of hard work. The other point is stay calm throughout your period of studies. Indeed, whatever paper you're studying for, do stay calm. You know, there will be some frustrating days within P6. I can assure you, I still get frustrated with certain areas and certain questions. I'm happy to tell you. And you know, stay calm in your studies. Don't get overly frustrated. If you come across an area that you're having problems with, you've read it a couple of times, you still don't get it, don't get frustrated about it. Just walk away from it. It'll still be there in a week or 3 or 4 days when you come back to it. And that also ties into what I would advise on the day of the exam as well. You know, you're going to be hit with a lot of information, particularly on question 1. You know, you must stay calm. Everyone is in the same boat within the exam hall. So, you know, do bear in mind that one of the things that the ACCA and indeed Rory Fish, the P6 examiner, one of the things they're testing is whether or not you can deal with pressure. You know, so you know, if you're not going to deal with pressure, it may well be that they won't let you into the club. So you've got to recognize that staying calm, dealing with whatever they throw at you, or Rory Fish throws at you on P6 day, is important for your success. So, and just my final point in relation to P6, and thanks for listening to me so far, is really good luck. Good luck with your studies. Good luck with all your papers. Good luck wherever you study, indeed. I hope you do well, and best wishes for results day.